back, and once again, I was glad I went. Guys don't like going to the doctor. They fight it, but sometimes it's good to go. Found out my testosterone was 1/3 the level what it should be for a guy my age. Found out my DHEA levels were significantly low. My thyroid was low again, and my body had practically stopped producing HGH. I was like, that's what's wrong. So at the age of 26, I started on testosterone replacement therapy. Started getting shots. And for the first month, I tell you, I felt like a new man. It was great. Second month, though, all the side effects of testosterone started kicking in. Became easily agitated, very, very, very angry, very easily, and started becoming very verbally abusive to Brianne. Fortunately, we caught it pretty early, not early enough, obviously. When you start in that stuff, it just, you can't take it back. So I went off of it, and I got worse. Started feeling a lot worse. Finally, we did some research, found a great naturopath in the area. Found out through that my adrenal glands had actually shut down completely. And that controls a lot of the hormones in your body, and that was the deal. And so it was like, we're going to put you on creams, we're going to put you on pills, and we're going to put you on drops, and it's going to be about 2 years before you get better. And that's if you can significantly reduce your stress. And for me at that point, stress, how can I reduce the stress in my life? Here I am dealing with all this stuff, hiding this sin from everybody in the world, including my wife, and our marriage is beginning to fall apart. Both our jobs aren't doing well, and life was just, it was coming down on me really fast. Over the next few months, start to feel a little bit better, but my marriage is getting worse. And by this time, I had begun to get into pornography a lot more because with avoiding sex in that part, there was no pressure in getting satisfied looking at a computer. And so that was rampant in my life again. Whenever she would leave, I'd be on the computer. And so in July of last year, she says, you know what? Things don't change. I'm going to have to separate. We're going to have to think things over. And that floored me. I'll tell you guys, that hit me, and I was just like, God, what am I going to do? My marriage could be over soon. I don't know what to do. And up to that point, I had begun to think, I got to tell her. I don't know how I'm going to tell her, but I have to tell her what's going on. And now it was kicked into high gear because she's saying we may have to separate. So I just remember a couple times during that month last year where I was like, okay, I got to tell her. And I remember sitting on our couch one night watching a movie, and at the end of the movie, my heart was just pounding, and I was just getting enough courage to say something. I finally say, Brianne, and she goes, what? And I just start crying. I just start bawling, and she's like, what's going on? And I chickened out, and I said, oh, the movie made me emotional. I'm just tired. It was a chick flick. It was a chick flick. But I copped out at that point. And a month later, August 24th of last year, she's at a birthday party of one of her friends. I'm online at home, looking at porn again. And after a few minutes of it, I unplug the computer and I say, this is it. I can't take this anymore. I feel like crap, both emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. I just felt like crap. And I said, I have to do something about this now. The next day, I was going to go golfing with my uncle. I was going to tell him then, because I was like, I just got to get this out in the open to somebody and then figure out how to tell her. But I chickened out then, too. The next day, I come home from work, and I'm like, this is it. I'm going to tell her right now. So I come home, and she's home, and she says, I'm not feeling too well, so I'm going to go take a nap. So she goes upstairs, and she's up there for a few hours. And finally, I go upstairs, and I open the door, and I say, Brianne, do you want to be married anymore? And the answer I was hoping for was yes, I want to be married, but this is not working. This is not working. We've got to figure out how to make this work. But yes, I want to be married to you. And then I was going to say, well, I know how to make this work. And I was going to tell her. But she looked at me and she said, I just don't think it's going to work anymore. And she said, I want to go over to my parents and just hang out over there for a little bit and watch a movie. I said, okay, go ahead and do that. And I looked out the window, and as soon as she left the driveway, I picked up the phone and I called my uncle. I told him everything, and he said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. He picked me up. We drove around for a couple hours, and I was just telling him everything over the course of 10 years to that point of what was going on. And he's like, you got to tell her tonight. I said, I know, I just don't know how to do this. And so I texted her, and we got back home and sat on the couch, and the bomb was dropped. And for the next 10 minutes, all I remember is yelling, anger, cussing, and I just sat there and took it. There's nothing I could do. And she gets up, and she's walking towards the front door, and I say, Brianne, can we please talk about this? And she goes, no, we can't. And she left. And that night, she didn't come home. The next morning, I wrote a long note for her, and I said in it, if you don't want me to come home today, just let me know. I'll give you your space. And about 1 o'clock that day, I get a text that said, don't come home today. So I went over to my aunt and uncle's and was over there. And about 11 o'clock that night, I got another text from her, and it said, I'm at my parents'. You can go home if you want. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go home. I kind of knew something was up, and so did my uncle. So he followed me home and walk in. And when I walk in, I notice there's stuff gone. And she had spent the day packing up, and she left. And that was the most sobering moment of my entire life, guys. I walked into my house, and things were gone, and my wife, who I committed my life to spend the rest of my life with, was gone. And guys, if you think for a second that if you're looking at this stuff, but it's not going to have any effect, it's not going to have any consequences, whether you're married or you're single or you're with somebody, I walked in and my wife was gone. That night, tried to get some sleep, couldn't, and the next few weeks were just me trying to convince her to come back, and she wasn't having anything of it. 3 weeks after that, I got divorce papers, and I learned in the state of Washington that you have 90 days after divorce papers are signed that it's a cooling down period and it's not official. And I thought, you know what? 90 days, that's a long time. That's a long time for God to be able to do something in my marriage. That's enough time for maybe her to cool down and to get thinking about things and maybe come back and work on this. Day 91, I get a text, and all it says is we're divorced. She had gone down to the courthouse that morning, and without me knowing, and finalized it, and I couldn't contest anything. And I sat there looking at that text, and all it said was we're divorced, and two things ran through my mind. First thing was, I had never, if I could have picked one thing in my entire life, I never wanted to be divorced. And here it was staring me in the face. And the other side of it was, I was actually okay. I was actually okay at that point. Because during those 4 months, God took over my life. And he transformed me into something I could have never imagined. Never imagined going through something like that. The worst part of my life, the worst season of my life, was also the best season of my life. And I want to share that with you because if my life was a book, this would be my favorite chapter right here. It all started back August of last year, 2010, during Team Church. My uncle was calling me all week long saying, you got to come back. You got to go to conference. And I raised my voice on the phone with him. I said, you don't understand. I hate that church. I'm not kidding. It burned in me. For 5 years, guys, it burned inside of me. And I tell you, all week long, I said, no, I am not going back to that place. I'm not stepping foot in that building ever again. You don't understand. So finally, the last day of the conference, he calls me and he says, I'm not asking you to come tonight. I'm telling you you're coming tonight. Thank you. And I don't know why, but I didn't argue. I don't know why. I don't know if it was because I thought it was the last night and he. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I went. We went. I told Brianne we were going. She looked at me like, what the heck? And so we went that night. And that night, Pastor Stephen Furtick spoke. And you guys are very, very familiar with him. I remember a few things about that night. Number one, I walked in trying to be inconspicuous, and I hadn't seen a lot of these people for 5 years. And I just remember seeing these faces I hadn't seen for 5 years, being in a place I hadn't been in for 5 years. I sit down, and out of nowhere, Pastor Kevin comes up and shakes my hand. And I'm just like, I don't want people to see me, and here is Pastor Kevin. He's shaking my hand. And I just remember he went around and shook everybody else's hand. And I was like, you know what? 5 years ago, he didn't do that. And I was like, so thoughts began in my head. Is something different, you know? And so I don't remember much about Pastor Stephen's message that night, but I do remember him talking about his church and how 5 years before that he had started his church with 20 people. And up to that point, it was up to 10,000 people. And 5 years, and I thought to myself, you know what, 5 years ago I left my ministry and what I was doing, what God had called me to do. And not that I'd be at some church with 10,000 people, but I just began to think, what would my life be like if I had followed what God had told me to do? And so I left there, didn't think much of it at that point, but it was a seed that was planted in my mind. 3 weeks later is when everything happened. Told Brianne, she left. That night, first night that she left, I picked up my Bible next to my bed where it had gathered dust because I hadn't picked it up for about 3-4 months. When I don't know where to go on my Bible, I just open up to Proverbs or Psalms and just pick a random chapter and say, God, please speak to me. Come on. So that night, I picked up my Bible, and I can tell you honestly, I wasn't the one who picked the chapter that night because I only got through verse 5 of Psalm 32. And I want to share that with you guys right now. It says, blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me, my strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. That's God right there. You can't explain that. And you know what? I don't know how to explain. I mean, that was my life the past 2 years, hiding my sin, my strength being taken away from me. My bones wasting away, groaning to God, take this life from me, and then he forgave the guilt of my sin. I don't know how to explain it to you guys, but at that moment, I knew I was healed. And ever since then, I haven't taken a drop, I haven't taken a pill, and I haven't taken any cream, and I've been fine ever since. That's God right there. Well, the next few weeks and months of my life, I was just pressing into what God had for me. I had started coming back here, and a part of me wanted to fight it, but part of me knew God wanted me here, and I was never supposed to leave here, so I came back here. Well, 3 weeks into coming back here, there's a guest speaker named Pastor John Morgan. And I had, for 6 years, been holding it inside of me. I was still mad at him. I was still angry with him. And I said, God, are you serious? 3 weeks? How often does he come here? In 3 weeks, I start coming back to church here. He's here. And so all week long, I fought it. I was like, I'm not going. I am not going to look at that guy. I'm not going to listen to that guy. I don't want to see him. And all week long, God was like, you know what? You've obeyed me up to this point. Why are you not going to follow through with this? And so I went.